This war is about extinguishing Ukraine's right to exist as a state, plain and simple.
President Biden there at the UN. Well, I'm joined now by Elizabeth Shackelford, Senior Fellow at the Chicago Council of Global Affairs and a former US diplomat. Thanks so much for joining us. Looking at this mobilization, putting another 300,000 reservists potentially towards or on the front lines, how might that change the course of the conflict?
I don't really see this changing the course of the conflict, but what it is a signal of is that Putin is doing something that he has been determined for 7 months now not to do. He was determined to keep this as low profile within the Russian public as he could, and it's a clear sign that he is feeling that his back is up against a wall and he doesn't have much choice. I imagine it's reflective of how low the numbers are of people that they have on hand to fight this war, and it's his intention to not lose it, but I don't think it's going to change the course of the war for him.
I was just speaking to a colleague about the release of 5 British nationals who'd been held by pro-Russian or proxy forces in the East. And my colleague was almost scratching his head trying to work out the Russian strategy. On the one hand, mobilizing and threatening the use of nuclear weapons. On the other hand, quietly releasing very important captives and prisoners of war. Can you help us to understand the Russian strategy in the last 24 hours?
I'm not sure there's a very clear Russian strategy going on, but there are a lot of desperate moves. I would say one of the things to note with the release of those captives, and it's always great news when you have something like that to report, either he's trying to, well, first of all, we don't know what he got in return. So there could have been something in exchange, whether it was prisoners or something else, some kind of other concession that was really important to him that could help him perhaps to mobilize some of the military that might be upset with the path of where things are going. But one thing that I noticed that really stood out to me was the role that Saudi Arabia played in this, particularly the Saudi crown prince, because right now, Putin is really running out of friends. And just last week, Chinese President Xi and Indian Prime Minister Modi both basically dressed down Putin in public as part of conversations happening around the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit that happened last week. And these are two countries that Putin has really relied on for support. So it looks to me like he is looking elsewhere for more friends because they have effectively told him that he needs to get this war wrapped up and that they've signaled that less support is coming from that side than I think Putin was hoping for.
So when he's in trouble and he has one phone call, who does he make it to?
Right now, it looks like it's Saudi Arabia.
Really?
I mean, we saw in the news last week, Putin and Saudi, through OPEC, were actually conniving to try and keep oil on the market lower in order to try and keep those prices up. And again, this is Putin desperately trying to maintain, some sense of economy coming in so that he can continue to fund this war. But the last couple of calls seems to have been to Saudi Arabia. I think before last week it would have been China.
Right, isn't that interesting, that shift? And we will try to keep people up to date with what we learn about what Russia would have got in exchange. The definition of a negotiation is that people do get things one way or another. Looking at the mobilization, I've spent some of the day speaking to people in Russia who are really worried about being called up, having family members called up. We've seen demonstrations. One organization says several hundred people have been arrested. How significant might opposition to that mobilization be? Are we overrating it?
The problem is it's so hard for us to have a real clear understanding of what the public perceptions are in Russia. I mean, a big part of that is because there's so much disinformation in Russia and coming out of Russia. So it's really unclear. The other issue is how much does public opinion really matter? I mean, at this stage, you still don't have elite kids in the streets of Moscow who are being pulled up. So until such time as the elites are really being impacted, that's going to be a challenge. I think one of the issues that Putin's really struggling with right now is keeping the military on board. I mean, after you've seen the routing by the Ukrainians, the Ukrainian military in their counteroffensive, there certainly are rumblings within the military of people who are upset with the path. Every time somebody proposes some pushback on Putin, though, they end up getting thrown out a window. So it's really hard to imagine that much pushback is going to have a real impact on Putin now. And they're certainly going to be arresting people. But Putin seems dug in at this stage. I imagine it would take a long time for that level of public pushback to really have an impact on his decision to keep maintaining this war. But we are seeing anecdotal evidence that the Russians do not want to go fight this.
Elizabeth Shackelford, thanks so much for speaking to us.
Thank you.